Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the third installment of the webinar series entitled Youth Inclusion in Africa. And in today's webinar, we're focusing on the intersections between youth and national development. And I think this webinar, or the theme for this webinar, came about through research and conversations with other researchers and youth activists. And it really kind of looked at, the national youth policies of a lot of African countries. How well are these being implemented? How well are they being budgeted for? And how are these policies being reviewed? And another part of that was questions around whether national youth policies should be integrated into national development plans or strategies. So that's the key focus for the three webinars that we have today. And thanks to everyone who has already joined us. If you do have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A function. If you're watching from Facebook, please feel free to drop a comment there, and I'll do my best to pick those up if they come through. The first presentation that we have today is by Brian Kamari, and Brian is a junior research fellow at the Center for Human Rights and Policy Studies, which is a Nairobi-based think tank in Kenya. Brian's presentation is entitled Lessons in Mainstreaming Youth Issues in National Youth Initiatives from the Kenya Youth Employment and Opportunities Program. Brian, are you all set? Do you need any assistance with the presentation?
No, I'm all set, Stephen. I'll just go ahead and put on my camera to say hello first. Hi, everyone. My name is Kimari, as said, and this presentation will be looking at the Kenya Youth Employment and Opportunities Project, which is a project that is currently ongoing in Kenya. And we'll hear about it a little bit more. Let me just share my presentation in the meantime. Stephen, I think it says you've disabled participant screen sharing. Could you allow the rights?
Okay, should be going now.
Great. All right. Is it visible, Stephen?
Yes, it looks great. Thanks.
See the presentation. Okay, good. All right. Yes, so here we're looking at the Kenya Youth Empowerment Program. And it's a program that's aimed at increasing employment and earning opportunities and specifically targets youth between the age of 18 and 29 in activities that involve various skills training and entrepreneurship support. And so it specifically targets youth who have just completed secondary education, that's Form 4 in Kenya. I think that would be grade 12 in South Africa. Yeah, who've completed high school, who've just completed high school, or are even below, who have not completed high school yet. And also specifically seeks out youth who are unemployed, or don't have active income generating opportunities at the time, and are not enrolled in school or anything else in that time. So it has 4 components. One is on job creation, employment. The other one is improving labor market information and strengthening youth policy development. So the study program, the study of KEOP that you're working on focuses on the first 2, on how KEOP does the first 2 issues, rather than the latter, because the latter usually speaks to development policies of the country itself and issues to do with the labor market, where they're trying to find learning for which kind of youth are needing employment, which kind of youth are available. So this study sought to assess the extent to which the KEOP program has contributed to inclusion of youth in economic and social spheres, and also looked at the impact on violence reduction And the impact on violence reduction will not be the focus of the presentation today. It's an important question that we're looking at in the program, and largely based on the idea that a lot of these youth programs set out to have an objective of violence reduction, which they presume that inclusion of youth through giving them employment and necessary skills will have an impact on violence reduction. Yes, however, the focus of this presentation today will be on how it managed to ensure inclusion of youth in the first place. It doesn't go into the second arm of how this inclusion contributed to violence reduction, but this will be highlighted in a study research report that should be out within the next month, as well as a journal article that should come through in the next year, early next year, in March, I believe. Yes, so the study was conducted in Nairobi County and Kisumu County, and was in urban areas within these regions. Both Kawangware and Kondele are neighborhoods within these two counties that are informal settlements, and also are seen as a microcosm generally of urban centers within Kenya because of their the shared realities of its residents, and of course of the youth who reside in those areas. Yeah, so the concept of the study was to look at how, was considering how the CARE program has met its objectives on youth empowerment. And it did this based on 3 dimensions that are, that have been set out by scholars in the issue of youth empowerment over time, and particularly that of Hope Campus Senior, who specifically came up with this 3 dimensions in relation to youth empowerment programs in Kenya. Yeah, so the 3 dimensions that we look at here are on whether the youth experience an environment of safety, closeness and appreciation. And this really goes into how much the youth felt that they were valued and respected within the program, and also the level of support that they gained within the program. And part of this is said to contribute to national development, to youth empowerment, because the youth will generally, have more efficacy and, and self-esteem in doing this kind of work. And also will continue to participate in the program because of these gains that it has. And also it looks at the dimension of meaningful participation and engagement. And this aspect looks into whether the activities they're enrolled in or participate in are relevant to their own lives. This questions the various program activities and benefits that are in place, and whether they were connected to the interests of youth work-wise, and also to the communities in which these youth reside. And finally, looks at the extent to which the youth are experiencing and exercising power. And this part, in relation to all the other 3, looks to whether youth experience, what role youth had within the program, and whether they were able to exercise power alongside the adults or the officials of the program, and really looks to whether these activities and the ownership that youth take in the program, which is thought to lead to youth becoming generally more involved in governance matters in their own countries and their own communities. Yeah, so these are the aspects the concepts that we looked at to establish the extent to which the youth empowerment program was inclusive and ensured the participation of youth. So in this, we consider these 3 aspects along various issues. And the focus for me will particularly break this down further into 3 main areas. First, how issues within recruitment that the youth brought on. Secondly, issues that relate to the program benefits. These are the 2 main things that we talked about: the entrepreneurial support That's the financial benefit, as well as the training and internships that are offered. So yes, it looks at recruitment, looks at how they were able to access program benefits, and then also looks at the support and partnership that was offered by the program. So first, if you get into youth and into recruitment, one of the main things we considered was which youth had access to information and through what channels was the information accessed. And we found that they use both traditional and social media sources. And traditional media is in line with Kenyan law that requires national programs by the government to be should be circulated in newspapers, radio station and TV stations that have a national reach. However, we also found that majority of the youth in the program, or the respondents who we spoke to rather, accessed information through social media. So this is information circulating on Facebook, forwards from Facebook and Twitter channel, from WhatsApp and Twitter. And that's how we found a lot of the youth managed to get information that will allow them to join the program. However, one of the main issues that we noted was that there was a general failure to understand how young people consume information, especially in urban areas, and across gender factors relating to the different youth. And the first thing we noted was that in a lot of informal settlements, there's very limited trust in the government. And this has to do also with previous government programs where youth have felt that they were scammed, A lot of them have had to struggle with corruption in the registration for this kind of programs, especially when they're held at administration offices like the local chief offices, where we found evidence of a lot of corruption and nepotism and generally just exchange of favors required to enter the program. So a lot of the youth have limited trust in even information that is put across about this. And they felt that this is especially when the information is shared on social media. It lends to this belief that the government program is a scam or a deliberate attempt to impoverish them further. So this came out in a lot of the conversations, where part of the challenge with recruitment was also that the posters or information about the program, further information about the program had to be accessed from the local offices like the chief's office. And many of them felt that already this locks out a lot of youth, especially the youth who are considered vulnerable or at risk due to the issues that they may have with the law. So a lot of them tend not to frequent local government offices like the chief's office because of fear and because of their past experiences with police and with governments. And yes, so this issues can't really be divorced from the major issues affecting the country. And one of the main things that we've observed happening in Kenya is generally a criminalization of youth, especially urban poor youth, who tend to be classified or mischaracterized as criminals a lot of the time. Yes. And other than this, we also looked at the application, the form of application for the program. And the application was largely done online. This is especially after COVID-19 happened. So after COVID-19 happened, it was made fully online, whereas before that, there was both physical and online application. However, we noticed a few things with the application process. And the first of all, connected to the issues I mentioned about the youth, it's that they were required to present their identification document. And this was, first of all, a plus for many youth, because these processes tend to be quite lengthy and require a lot of documentation to be presented, which many of the young people don't expect to have. And but then this also presented a particular challenge, because, as the program said, it primarily targeted youth who had just completed secondary education and were not engaged in other things, and those who are also had not attained the age of 18. So this requirement of an ID document presented various challenges, because a lot of the youth who have just finished high school had not applied for their identification documents, whereas others were unwilling to go through the process of applying for an identification document. We were against this process of applying for an identification document because they felt that it was part of a process of criminalizing them, related to this general mistrust in the government, and also found that the process was quite difficult. A lot of these youth who are in informal settlements and don't have the necessary information that one would be required to have to get an identification document. Most of them don't know their rural homes where they were born, or do not have parents who are in positions to help them acquire that. However, we also observe that the government has generally made a lot of strides in ensuring that different actors, different youth are able to access identification documents, including marginalized youth, especially those from communities that have a terrible history with the state. So this includes the members of the Somali community in Kenya who have usually been left out of identification process, and those also who live at the border, at counties that are on the border of Kenya and other countries, who also tend to be seen as to be treated as though they are not Kenyans and are crossing in from the border. Another barrier here is that the online method had a lot of barriers of access, because first of all, a lot of people did not have access to smartphones, or did not have access to computers that would enable them to apply online. So many of them had to suffer extra costs of application, since they had to go to cyber cafes that would help them apply for the process, and also had to employ the services of fellow youth or the attendants at those different cyber cafes to help them complete the application. And this is related to the fact that a lot of them also, despite many of them having smartphones and the rest, many did not have the technical know-how to use this online method of application. And finally, the program selected people randomly. And this did, the major thing that this did is that it cured the issues of corruption and nepotism that I had mentioned before. And this especially was thought by many youth to be useful because of the previous experiences of the same. However, it presented a challenge because, again, due to the lack of technical know-how and the other factors that I mentioned before, a lot of the applicants that are able to apply for the programs already possess some form of privilege over those who were excluded. So many felt that the random selection process just furthered this exclusion, because it did not look into which categories of youth are vulnerable and are more needing of this program. So it presented kind of a situation where many youth were torn between deciding whether the random selection was actually positive or negative. And it also lent currency to ideas. It lent currency to ideas that that there was still corruption, because many felt that because they were not able to get in, or many of the people that they knew did not get in, it favored privileged candidates over others. However, there was no proof of this from the investigation, from the program, but this was a feeling amongst a lot of the youth who took issue with the random selection process. Good. And other than this, we also looked at how the youth were able to access program benefits and look at whether the process was inclusive. So just to point out, there were three training areas as life skills, core business skills and entrepreneurship skills, all of which were done within 2 weeks, 2 weeks each rather, each of which were done within 2 weeks, so 6 weeks total. And following the 6-week training, they would proceed to a 5-month internship program or apprenticeship program based on that, based on the training programs that they're attached to. And then also there were financial benefits, including a monthly stipend of 6,000 Kenya shillings or 60 USD. I'm actually just realizing that the currency conversion rate is much different now, and that would make the amount much less towards USD, towards, much less US dollars, about 50 something USD, I think 53 or so USD would be the equivalent of 6,000. And also there were entrepreneurs who were involved in the program were given 2 installments of 20,000 Kenya shillings. It's around 40,000 Kenya shillings. So various issues were brought out with regard to the training and internship. And first of all is to mention that the youth pointed out, the youth interviewing the program pointed out that they felt that the training offered were, first of all, very beneficial, with the core business and entrepreneurship training having imparted skills that continue to contribute to their income generation. A lot of them have been able to start businesses or be able to improve their income generating activities, despite the fact that they may not be formal businesses or entrepreneurship attempts. And also that they felt that the internship or apprenticeship that they managed to do offered them, fantastic practical skill sets and networks, including many of whom were retained or absorbed by the master craftsmen who took charge of their apprenticeship. And it's that this internship also generated income for the local business owners, who were brought in to train the youth, and in a way also contributed to the community in general. It made contributions to the community in general. Further, they mentioned that the life skill training that they offered, they said it had several useful components that imparted a lot of social skills that many had not thought about, and also generally increased their self-confidence and their self-efficacy in managing their own lives. So this is a finding that, as we go back to those 3 components that we mentioned, of meaningful participation and engagement and experiencing and environmental safety, many felt that they were able to participate in activities that were useful or relevant in their lives. So they felt that to some extent, there was very meaningful participation in that. However, this still had its own challenges. And the first being that, the training areas were quite limited. They were quite limited. The three trainings that were offered, many felt that these were quite limited, and they wanted to be exposed to different issues that are relevant to them, or even more specific core business training or entrepreneurship training that relates to modern kind of income generating activities and avenues that would be useful for them. And many felt that although they were trained, the internship that they went through was done by master craftsmen in different areas like woodwork, general electrical work. Some were able to do arts and photography and others. They still felt like that even when they found their niche, there usually were limited slots for those areas. There were limited slots and there were limited number of master craftsmen who would be able to take them through that process and to train them on these issues. Another thing is that many of them felt that the quality of training was sometimes substandard. So this is particularly an issue because the youth generally had different levels of education and skills. So while some of the youth who at that point had a much lower level of education felt that the training was useful and the quality was all right, whereas people who had just a bit more know-how felt that the training was not of sufficient quality to enable them to take part in entrepreneurial ventures, which in a sense would then defeat the purpose of the program. Yeah, would defeat the purpose of the program. Many also felt that
Sorry, Brian,
craftsmen who were,
just a couple of minutes left.
Okay. Yeah. Many also felt like that the trainers who were there often lacked the skills, even if they had the skills on the area they were talking about, did not have the skills to teach. They lacked the pedagogical skills to especially reach youth from different areas, backgrounds, and education levels. Yeah. And here they also, speaking about the financial benefits that they got, I think overwhelmingly many felt that while the stipend was useful and helped them contribute to their own household expenses, it still was often not enough. As I mentioned, many had to travel quite some distance to get their training or to their internship areas. And the 6,000 Kenya shillings was often felt not to be enough. And this is, additionally, the funds were usually not released on time. And the training phase did not allow them to simultaneously hold other jobs. It was very rigid, and as you saw from the eligibility criteria, it required youth who were not engaged in any other activities, including school. And so this locked out a lot of youth who could have joined the program because first the funds were quite little, while many also dropped out of the program because they were not getting enough to meet the expenses at the time. And another challenge is that the officials in the program, many felt that the officials in the program would kind of look at them as though, would not understand them and look at them as though they're only interested in the money rather than looking at how their needs should be met. The funds that were given to entrepreneurs were problematic also for a few reasons. First, many felt that it was very limited. It was very limited. Was largely not able to meet their business costs, and and further, this money was only given to established businesses and not to startups. So they specifically had a policy where startups were not given access to funding, and these were again affected by the delays in disbursement. So this posed a number of factors because youth who did not have entrepreneurial interest would not get access to these financial benefits, and at the end of the training would feel like they lost out quite a bit. Many applied for local businesses that they had started or that had been failing, and the response they got was that their businesses need to be existing and kind of seen as a going concern, which again would defeat the purpose of the program, which is to enhance this capacity. And finally, looking at the issue of support and partnership, the study found that it was very much a top-down approach that was brought from the government and implemented without incorporating opinions and incorporating the support of youth in the program. While there were consultation processes before the program started, many felt that this was mostly tokenistic and not really meant to acquire their views. In fact, even the study officials felt that a lot of the planning and designing had already been done, so that the consultation process was merely just to tick a box. And other than this, many felt that there was no affirmative action. There was no affirmative action to consider the diverse factors that that may affect different youth. So one of the main things here is that the young parents in the program, young mothers, young fathers who needed to be close to their children were sent far, so they had to drop out. and also that while the program had a grievance redress mechanism online and also allowed views to be expressed on their social media channels and their YouTube channel, this was also in itself seen to be tokenistic, because the youth were afraid of raising concerns, and this is a major factor, because when these programs are brought down, they are made or made to understand that they need to be more grateful, and that it's generally painted as though it's to help them and they should have no further say, and also they felt that while they made a lot of reports and complaints, these were usually no action was usually taken, or it was very delayed. And the KOP officials also argued that they typically had very little powers to redress any of these grievances. So they would just end up receiving complaints and nothing gets done. Well, again, people felt that they did not understand the youth. Finally, I offer various recommendations
sorry,
here.
Brian, can I ask you
the
if you just
areas. I think Steven
summarize your recommendations first so we can move to the next presenter?
Fantastic. Yes. So I think primarily, if I was to break it down, it's that in general, in designing this kind of national development programs, we need to ensure that the youth are consulted all through, and not just consulted, that they are brought on board as partners with an almost equal footing, so that they're able to bring up their views, and also understand and learn from the officials that they'd be working with. So this would be a very necessary step in order to kind of address most of these challenges that I've talked about in this across the different areas. Yes, and also that the program should adopt a much flexible approach when addressing the issues that various youth access. This should go into looking at the various categories of youth who are present and understanding the different issues that they face, and then tailoring the programs and the tailoring the programs to these youth, including through incorporating lessons that we get from the program into their program designs, and also into future program designs on youth empowerment. I'll leave it at that, Steve.
Thanks, Kamari. Thanks for your presentation. And sorry we couldn't cover it in more detail. Our next presenter is Ransom Macheker, and Ransom is a researcher and currently the program manager for the Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust based in Zimbabwe. Ransom's title or presentation that he's doing today is entitled Youth Mainstreaming and National Development in Zimbabwe. Ransom, over to you. Ransom, are you there? I'm not sure if you're muted.
You.
Sorry, Ransom, your connection. Oh, I think we've actually lost Ransom. He did mention that his connection hasn't been great. I think maybe the best way to proceed is maybe we'll jump to the next presentation, and hopefully then Ransom can come in for the third presentation. The third presentation is by myself, and I just wanted to pull it up. Let me see if I can screen share. Let me try and find it. Great. So I hope everyone can see my presentation. My presentation today is really looking at Zoom doesn't always work so well. It's looking at some of the challenges associated with national and youth developments in South Africa. And linked this research, or this presentation, develops from the research that Brian was also just talking about. It's looking at youth inclusion and violence prevention. And as part of this project, we did a regional review of literature, policies, and programs in Southern and East Africa. That included 4 countries: South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. And we tried to learn what are some of the key lessons that we can take from literature, policies, and large-scale programs in these 4 countries. Ransom, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I decided to just jump ahead whilst hopefully your connection improves. Hopefully you can stay with us, and then you can jump in after me. I hope that's okay. So some of the themes, there are various themes across national youth policies of 4 different countries. And I think one of them is that youth development has been an important part of post-colonial development in these 4 countries. We can see in South Africa, for example, that the governments of national unity and then the ANC government started developing structures that were specifically aimed at developing youth and addressing young people's needs. In Zimbabwe, likewise, I spoke to a member of the Southern African Youth Forum who mentioned the exact same thing, that young people were very involved in the liberation in Zimbabwe and likewise across the continent. And so youth development was a strong focus there. The extent to which youth have been developed, or the extent to which their needs have been addressed, obviously is something that's up for debate. These policies have also been influenced by international and regional policies, such as the African Union's African Youth Charter. And I think that contributed to quite a surge in the number of national youth policies across the continent. And these policies generally have a rights-based approach to youth development, including rights such as freedom of expression, movement and association, non-discrimination, a right to a quality education. And there's also strong links to topics such as recognizing youth diversity. A lot of national youth policies, or the 4 that I looked at, they recognize the diversity of young people. They recognize gender inequality and disparities and the need to have interventions that target people of different genders, even though it's still used in quite a binary way. They recognize spatial aspects, rural vs urban youth. They emphasize the need for education and employment. So there are a lot of overlaps in national youth policies. So what is the crux of the presentation that I wanted to make today? I think it's really that there are a lot of great national youth policies. If you read these policies, they read well. You feel inspired after you've read these national youth policies. But the key issue is, to what extent are these policies, how much budget is put aside for implementing these policies, and how well are these policies being evaluated and reviewed. There are some key points, or there are some key areas of national youth policies that are obviously being implemented. So like in South Africa, the National Youth Development Agency will have large-scale employment initiatives. They will have a lot of initiatives that link to the National Youth Policy, but other areas are not being covered as well. And so I asked myself, why is this the case? Why do we have such great policies, but they're not being implemented or they're not being evaluated? And obviously there can be multiple factors that contribute to that. And in the review that we put together and different subject experts, obviously recognize a lack of budget. So in terms of how policies are developed, and especially South Africa's national youth policy, the policy is put together, and then there is a need to try and find the budget for reaching the outcomes that are included in there. There's also a lack of policy coordination. So when I interviewed different stakeholders and asked them, what are some of the key youth policies that we should recognize, they mentioned a plethora of policies, and even if a policy doesn't directly mention young people, obviously there are many policies that influence young people's lives. Another issue is obviously difficulties with interdepartmental and intersectoral collaboration. Government departments are directed by their mandates, and their strategic plans are linked to their mandates. And yes, like in South Africa, you'll see government departments mentioning things like the National Development Plan, maybe mentioning the National Youth Policy. But their key focus is still on achieving their mandates that have been set out. And obviously in South Africa, we've recognized these challenges. We recognize it's difficult for departments to coordinate and collaborate. And so we have developmental clusters like the economic development cluster or social development clusters. And, our president has been, champion for recognizing the need for this collaboration. But obviously there's still a lot of challenges that are faced there. And obviously linked to literature and conversations that I've had is that there's some people still sense that these youth policies are just created to appease activists or appease those who are interested in youth development. So a few weeks ago, I would have said that, probably the solution, why we have these problems with evaluation and implementation is because we're not mainstreaming youth issues into national development strategies. And, I would have gone out there and said, that's the answer. Let's mainstream youth in national development. But the reality is that we have great challenges in achieving the outcomes set out in our national development plan as well. I read the review or the National Planning Commission's review of the NDP, and unfortunately it is very dismal. It's not a good read. And so then I asked myself, but why are we struggling with achieving the outcomes of the National Development Plan? And I even, we hosted a webinar as CSVR and spoke to different activists in South Africa. And, a lot of the points that came up tied to what I've just mentioned here, the issues with departmental mandates, coordination. There's also a lack of policy and developmental cycle alignment. So if you look at the National Development Plan, it's not actually 2020 to 2030. It seemed to come in the early 2010s. So I think around 2013 is when the NDP was brought into place. But then the National Youth Policy, their timelines differ. So a key document is developed, and then you have the National Youth Policy that comes in and is not always as strongly tied to the NDP. And another issue is also that obviously development, national youth development is then obviously also influenced by the level of political stability in a country. So in South Africa, yes, the ANC has been in power, since 1994. But it's in other countries it might be different. Government might only be in place for 2 terms, and maybe then the new government brings their ideologies and their plans in place. And obviously, the political party or government in charge then has to either align their term developmental plans with these national plans, or they might completely scrap them. And that's obviously something that can be a big issue. My last slide is, I think, it's also been mentioned that there's a lack of IT or information technology infrastructure to monitor and evaluate large-scale, complex developmental outcomes. And I guess it is exceptionally difficult to manage and monitor outcomes like improvements in youth employment, or to monitor improvements in gender equality or whatever it is at a national scale must be exceptionally difficult. It's difficult for NGOs to do it, within their organizations. But I think the issue is also that it hasn't really been prioritized. It's just the sense that it could have been done. And there are things in place, there are structures in place, but there's more can still be done there. Another issue is obviously politics and a lack of accountability, which I think links to a lack of public pressure and activism. I guess the question we should be asking is why is it important that voters care about evaluation? Why should the public, why should young people, why should we care about national youth policies, or why should we care about the National Development Plan? And, again, obviously, it's to try and connect with young people and to say how this lack of evaluation contributes to their difficulty finding work, or, how this lack of evaluation is impacting their lives. I'm sure there are so many other factors that we need to consider. And like the title of this presentation suggests, that there are many other factors. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the attendees and panelists to hear what your thoughts might be. That's it from my side. Let me stop screen sharing and then hand over to Ransom. Ransom, are you with us? Oh, I see Ransom is not with us. He has mentioned that he's trying to log in with a different device. So hopefully he can get with us. But I wanted to maybe see from Brian or from the attendees that we have with us, whether you have any questions, please add those to the Q&A section. Or if you would like to raise your hand, please do so. And let's see what you found interesting about the presentations, or what other points you might like to mention. I'll also check the Facebook live stream to see what comes up there. Just waiting to see. At this point in time, we don't have any questions. We don't have any comments. Let me see if I can. Just waiting to see. At this point in time, we don't have any questions. You can hear that I'm going onto my phone. Let's see. Okay. Unfortunately, we don't have any questions or comments, but that's okay. Guess we might just have to see if Ransom can get back on, if he's able to log on. But maybe I wanted to ask, I see Charlotte has a question. Charlotte, you've been unmuted. You're welcome to contribute. Oh, Charlotte seems to drop off. I think linked to youth development, one of the issues that comes up is the cost of data. And I guess another one that we need to consider is the stability of like mobile networks. And I guess that's a barrier and a form of exclusion that many young people face. I guess just being part of this webinar is a privilege, for many young people and people across the continent. It's, mobile connection is not something that's as easy. Brian, I'm sorry that I cut you short. I wanted to see if you maybe, from your recommendations, if there's anything else you wanted to elaborate on, or any recommendations that you have in terms of youth development plans or strategies.
Thanks, Steven. I think the summary that I gave was kind of what came up from the research. So I wouldn't want to belabor it further. But I think, just generally looking at youth development issues, one of the things that I would argue would be very important is reconsidering the lens through which youth are viewed, the lens through which we look at youth. Again, going with what you presented, the youth development programs themselves just tend to be, to kind of have they have a ticker box approach, a tokenistic approach, just to answer certain questions, and also this consideration of youth as an at-risk group, vulnerable to violence, vulnerable to harm, that kind of thing. I think it presents a lot of problems that we all need to have national conversations about, because it's a global issue, a global angst when it comes to youth, and also tends to divorce them just generally from the contexts within which they live, and from the context of the country in general, the countries in which they reside in general. And we need to really start looking at youth issues, in tandem with all other issues that affect development in the country. I see that Ransom is back on, so I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Kimari. I definitely agree. Youth narratives, and even the narrative linking youth exclusion to violence, is definitely something to consider. Ransom, are you with us? Ransom, can you unmute yourself? Ransom, please feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah, I think definitely maybe just linked to what Kimari said is definitely there's still very much a top-down approach to policy development, and I guess when it comes to youth inclusion, that is one of the areas that really needs to be addressed. And in the research that we've been doing, I asked, in South Africa, we have the Department of Women, Youth and People with Disabilities, who has been responsible for putting together our national youth policy. And I spoke to one of the key representatives there about the levels of inclusion in that policy. And he mentioned that obviously it was quite difficult to get youth involved, or to find ways of representing young people. They tried to have provincial or county level engagements with youth. They try to engage with youth via different social media platforms, via local radio stations. But, I think it's in the sum total, they might have only consulted with maybe about 800 young South Africans or young people living in South Africa. And I guess a lot of people would say that's not good enough, that we need to have more involvement. And even in the review of the draft, there's a sense that the department didn't meaningfully engage with young people's contributions to that draft. I did notice the hand from Boykanya. Boykanya, I just wanted to see if Kimari wanted to contribute before I come to you.
No, nothing further. I'm happy to hear from Boykanya.
Cool. Let me unmute Boykanya. Boykanya, you're welcome to chat.
Hi, Steve and Kumari. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I just had a comment. Thank you so much for both your presentations. They were quite interesting. Just touching on what Kumari had stated about changing the way that we look at the youth, or how the state looks at the youth. I mean, I think there's a huge disconnect in terms of what we define the youth as and what. So I think that the issue is that there's a huge infantilization of what the youth is. So in terms of African culture, when you are part of the youth, or let's say, for example, in a family, for example, you wouldn't be considered somebody that would be allowed to give in meaningful or impactful contributions towards maybe what the family should be doing, or plans towards the enrichment of the family. So just taking it down to like a smaller unit, right? And I think that's where mostly the disconnect lies, in the fact that the state or our leaders are very old people who somewhat look at us as children who don't necessarily have a say, even though we've sort of proven that we do have a say, we do have meaningful contributions to make towards the betterment of our futures and the future of our countries. But it sort of seems like there's a major disconnect between the two. And I think that really influences policy making and policy decisions, and how we are viewed in terms of those decisions and how they come out. So maybe the question I would like to pose is that how do we bridge that gap and make them take us more seriously from that stance? Thank you.
Thanks, Bokanyo. Yeah, most definitely. And I think it's across cultures. I think even growing up at family gatherings as a young person, even under the age of 18, we had a separate table where we would eat at, because there wasn't enough space for us at the adult table. And you could see how the men would be talking about politics and sports, and the woman would be on the other side of the table. And yeah, I guess that exclusion and that sense that older men kind of know better is at different levels. And yeah, thanks for the question. I guess Kimari and obviously Bokanyo is, yeah, how do you think we can address that issue?
I wish I knew, honestly. I think if I had the answer to that, I myself would be very different now. I'd have achieved much more in terms of the doors that are locked kind of for youthful people like myself. I think a major challenge here is that we, as Steven also seems to make the point that, we kind of have to develop all these strategies and all these things on youth in tandem with general issues that are affecting society. I mean, there's a lot of inequality in different forms, and specifically affecting the youth. We need to address multiple cultural issues, just multiple, and that's across everywhere. As I was saying, I think the angst about youth has kind of been documented over such a long period of time. I just think that the solution can only come from the young people who are currently existing and who are already starting to kind of change these narratives, change these ideas, and reclaim their space through different ways, including through the use of social media platforms that has generally allowed, these ideas to spread to a wider audience. And I think within social media and within digital platforms and digital technology lies some of the answer for how we can manage to convince a whole change in the way future generations think.
Thanks so much, Kimari. And Bokanyo, you're welcome to unmute yourself and jump back in the conversation. And I'm watching if anyone else would like to unmute themselves, you're welcome to do so. I guess, for me, the question is, for me, I find it quite interesting, that in different countries, there's even an age restriction on who can run for presidency. And I can't say exactly which country it is, but in some countries, you have to be older than the age of 35 just to be able to run for president. And as I say, it's not an area that I know in great detail, but I'm sure that there are even restrictions on age restrictions for members of parliament. And we are seeing changes in those areas. And in South Africa, we are seeing more young people being represented in parliament. But obviously there are still restrictions. Representation in parliament doesn't always, translate into some of the outcomes that we're looking at. Bokanyo, would you like to jump in?
No, Steve, not as yet, but thank you for the responses.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Steve, that's actually in Kenya that you have to be 35 to be a president in a lot of other countries. And, this just goes to show that, already kind of the blocking out on youth has been so mainstreamed, has been so understood by everyone else. Again, that infantilization that Boykanyo has alluded to is such a significant problem, and really one of the major factors that prevents us from pushing this issue forward. I think from people who are in different spaces, one of the goals of this programs, like the youth development programs, can do to breach this gap is also to empower a lot of youth. This is what I was talking about when I said that youth have to be brought in fully. They have to be brought in fully to these programs. They have to be involved in designing the solutions, and they have to take center stage in conversations regarding, addressing these narratives and changing the lens through which youth are looked at.
Great, thanks so much, Brian. I think that was a great snippet. That contribution is something that I'd definitely like to cut out and put up by itself, and I thank you for that. I do see that we do not have any other questions or comments, and unfortunately, it does seem like Ransom was not able to connect. Unfortunately, his connection is not great. Or Ransom, are you with us? Ransom, are you there?
Yeah, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You can. Ransom, you're welcome. I think you still got at least 10 minutes if you'd like to make a presentation. We still do have attendees with us, and we still are live streaming on Facebook. Please go ahead and let's hear your presentation.
Thanks. Unfortunately, I won't be able to share my presentation because I had to switch devices to some less bandwidth. And by the connection, just let me know so that I can. But looking at youth meaning in national issues, from my experience, found that the issue is not really around reinventing the wheel, but enhancing what is available, because young people have been to the table to provide change over a long period, but the recommendation that young people are hardly then utilized to actually improve the situation of young people and countries. But looking at the example of Zimbabwe,
Oh, yeah, man. Unfortunately, Ransom's connection dropped, but it does seem he is coming back. Hopefully, I have heard in last week's webinar we were discussing
under
different
Vision 2030, which is to
Sorry, Ransom, please continue. We can hear you again.
okay. So I was saying that Zim got a vision currently, which is Vision 2030, and looking at the number of resources and the value of the resources, natural resources that Zimbabwe has, looking at diamonds, coal, chromium ore, asbestos, gold, nickel, copper, youth mainstreaming in national development should not be a major issue. There should not be a struggle to create formal jobs. There should not be a struggle to get young people the work experience that they require. There should not be a struggle for young people to become active citizens and active participants in the national discussion. And but looking at our experience and what we then recommend, I think issues around enforcing the provisions that are available, whether they're within the national constitution or within the national youth policies, have to become the major focus for now. There might be need to slightly move away from development project and national development blueprints of countries. Giving an example of what Zimbabwe is focusing on all over the next few years, there are issues around infrastructure development, investments in energy, water, sanitation, roads, health, education, housing, and social amenities. And I think a recommendation for us would then be, we need to have more enforcement of available provisions. Zimbabwe has a provision in its national youth policy where there should be opportunities available and reserved for young people to be able to take part in various aspects of the economy, whether it's tourism, whether it's in energy or other facets. So I think the enforcing of mechanisms, capacitating parliament, capacitating policymakers so that they're able to be accountable and have the political will to enforce what is available is a major priority. Young people are a diverse group. Now have young people who are in universities, in schools, but we also have young people who are in business, who can provide services around water, sanitation, and roads. They have their businesses that should also be prioritized and be given some sort of support to be able to take part in the national development. Only when young people have a bigger cake of the economy can then their voice and numbers actually then mean something. So I think issues of ensuring that there's transparency on getting tenders and provisions for supporting businesses for young people so that they don't suffer from the tax burden as much as they are, will help young people to be involved in the national development discourse, not just as people who are consulted during workshops, but being able to provide services, whether they're engineers, whether they've got businesses that can fix roads, fix health institutions, young people who are researchers who can actually then be incorporated in terms of developing content, developing books, curriculums for national development, I think is a major issue for us to ensure that young people have a bigger cake. And enforcing this needs to then become a major priority. Evidently, our national youth policies have not done very well around this. And possibly there's need to then start thinking of capacitating young people on one end, as well as addressing the political will and commitment of political leaders on the other end. And issues around this also then have to then ensure that when we say that something is reserved and should be available for young people, it needs to be well documented, written down, and young people in their various movements need to be able to push through these and even have strategic litigation at constitutional level, challenging governments in the courts and elsewhere so that there is enforcement of provision. They need to then also bridge the gap, because some of the people that are supposed to represent the young people are not, they do not have the right capacity to actually represent young people, which then affects how we can enforce some of these provisions. So I think there's then need to then also push and support leaders that show commitment and political will towards young people. And political will means that there's budget allocation for something that we've agreed upon. It means that there is enforcement. It means that ministers, businesses can be summoned to parliament and other institutions to give an account as to why they are not supporting youth mainstreaming development. And we feel that from our experience, being able to enforce provisions that are available will go a long way in ensuring that young people are mainstreamed in national development projects, so that we avoid having young people being divorced from whatever else is happening within the country. About financial inclusion, poverty alleviation, safety nets, climate resilience, natural resource management, all of this needs to incorporate young people fully and not have young people being divorced or being treated as a special group, elsewhere. And I think if we're able to then build solidarity amongst the different countries and then start utilizing continental and even regional platforms and where we then meet as young people to push our African states to enforce what is available, we can then try and make some progress on some of the provisions and aspirations of the African Youth Charter and other documents. I feel there's, of course, there are some policies that still need to be improved, but we have abandoned policies and documents that are readily available right now, that if we're to just do 50 to 60% of what those documents say, we might be able to improve the situation of young people on the continent and in our countries. And I think just with that submission, I think I'll stop there and
Thanks so much, Ransom. Thanks. I'm really happy that we were able to hear your presentation. And, I think one of the points that I can strongly agree with is that the need for more of a regional youth advocacy, more pressure from neighboring countries like us, South Africa, and from other parts of the continent to support young people in countries such as Zimbabwe, or to support young people in South Africa, whatever the country is. I really appreciate that, and many other people, agree that that's something that we need. And I hope that that's a point that we can also take forward, to say exactly how do we build these regional networks? What might be the best way of doing that? If we look, for example, at the Gambia and ECOWAS as a regional body, from what I understand is that regional pressure was key to the political shifts that happened there. And, so I think that's something that we really need to look at. Brian, I'm not sure if there's any point from Ransom's presentation that you'd like to pick up on.
No, nothing further. Sorry.
Great. Ransom, any last words from yourself while I see if we have any other comments? Any other points that you would like to make, Ransom?
I think just on the just an issue around regional solidarity and supporting each other as young people. I think the issue of constant follow-ups needs to then be emphasized, and as young people, we need to push ourselves to also move beyond the big conferences. Is it possible for us to get to a stage where we can have quarterly targets that we can all then follow across different countries, so that we're having the big conferences that happen on an annual basis, and push more support of governments, departments of our state on a quarterly basis, with small tangibles, small targets that we can quickly then learn from, and then utilize those lessons, then share across the regions. Across the region and across the continent. When we then share what is working elsewhere and what is working elsewhere on a more regular basis, focusing on more technical issues and avoid the bigger conferences, I think it can possibly then help us to have more solidarity and more support of each other across the continent. Thanks. I think those are just my last words.
Thanks so much, Ransom. I really agree with that point, and I thank you again for your presentation and your contributions. I think in closing, I'm really happy to see the synergies and the connections between last week's webinar and this week's webinar. Looking at activism or youth activism on the continent, and saying what lessons can we learn? What are some of the strategies that governments use to suppress youth activism in countries where that happens, and what are the strategies that young people are using to overcome those barriers and obstacles, and how do we learn from each other, and how do we work together to advance youth development, not just nationally but across the continent. I just want to thank everyone who attended today, and I want to thank our panelists. So I'd like to thank Kumari and Ransom. Thanks so much for your contributions, and please connect with each other. Please follow each other on Facebook or on social media. Please reach out via email with public or personal protection. I hope you guys are okay if I shared your emails, just so that we can connect. I think that's something that's really important. For myself, I'd just like to say thanks again, and please stay well. All the best.